So I didn't end up finding out about Knights until the Sega crossover games. Superstars Tennis, Sonic and All-Stars Racing, basically all the Sega's take on Smash Bros. Games. Those games introduced me to the world of forgotten Sega IPs. Monkey Ball, Jet Set Radio, Samba de Amigo, Billy Hatcher. These are all IPs I wouldn't have known about without these games, because, Sega doesn't really like to use them a lot anymore. And almost every Sega IP was different enough from anything else I'd seen in the gaming world at the time to drive my interest in some way. But Knights in particular stood out to me because with such a whimsical and weird design, I just couldn't process what kind of game the character came from. Other characters kind of made sense or were somehow explained to me. Beat visually told me everything I needed to know about his game. He looks like a rebellious teenage human character living in the modern day, so his game was probably Tony Hawk-esque with elements of spray painting, The Space Channel 5 characters were kind of weird, but they were at the very least human. And their game's title pretty much tells you everything you need to know. That being that these people are news reporters in space. Space Channel 5. Knights, though, gave me no signals whatsoever. The name didn't tell me anything. The gesture-like design and purple coloration made me think that there was an Alice in Wonderland thing going on. And then the stage themes reminded me of an animal mascot platformer. I was getting very mixed signals. And to top it all off, the box art of the second game made it look like the game took place in modern-day England, so I was completely lost. I just couldn't make sense of what the story or gameplay behind a Knights game could be before I actually got to play one. And as it turns out that the reason I had so much trouble comprehending what a Knights was because it was intentional. Sort of. It's because the game takes place in a dream where anything can happen and nothing has to make sense. In other words, I wasn't thinking outside the box enough. I played Knights into Dreams for the first time only recently, and to start off with, the game is absolutely great. Besides the second game, I've really never played a game like it, and hope that Sega finds a way to bring it back. It's quickly become one of my favorite Sega IPs. It's really fun flying around doing tricks and mastering the game's level design, and it's short too, which makes it pretty easy to replay whenever you feel like it. Now, usually after beating a game, if I really liked it or found something about it that was thought-provoking or just kinda cool, it will just invade my thoughts for weeks. This happened to me with stuff like Breath of the Wild, pretty much every Atlas game I've played up until this point, and of course, Knights into Dreams. So what was it about this game that invaded my thoughts? You know how I just went on that whole spiel about how I first found out about this game and this character? How the mystery behind the Knights series' tone and plot was what kept me digging? That feeling of not knowing what the Knights series was really like, and how I seemingly had all the pieces to figure out this Knights character, but I just didn't know how to put them together. That in and of itself was a dreamlike feeling for me. And it's that surreal feeling that the game put me through that really drew me in, and it turns out that surreal feeling is what the game really nails even beyond that initial draw. Basically what I'm trying to say is that the game knows exactly how to make you feel like you're in a dream. Let me start with the levels and the actual look of the game. I want to compare this game to a few Sonic games, namely the classic Sonic games. This game is a lot like Sonic CD and Knuckles Chaotix in that each level is pretty all over the place and not super clearly defined. They don't exactly take place in the most realistic of settings, even for the Sonic series. For example, Sonic 1's Green Hill Zone has a pretty self-explanatory theme to it. The stage takes place on a grassy hill area, and the game's visuals don't do anything to dissuade from that fact. Green Hill Zone looks exactly like a hilly green area. On the other hand, Sonic CD and Knuckles Chaotix have levels that don't really have a specific theme in mind, or at the very least don't visually communicate that theme very well. Collision Chaos from CD, for instance, has casino-like gameplay elements to it, but it isn't a casino. I can't really describe what its particular theming is, and the name doesn't help either. I don't know what a Collision Chaos is. Knights, like I said before, does something similar with its levels, but it works with this game in particular for two reasons. A, the game takes place within a child's dream, meaning that nonsensical areas actually make sense within the game's context. And B, the levels have relatively better defined themes than even the two games I compared it to. While it is true that the designs of these levels are incredibly wacky and feel like something straight out of Doctor Strange, the actual theming of the levels are fairly straightforward. Unlike Collision Chaos, I can tell what most of the levels in Knights into Dreams are supposed to be. Spring Valley is a mountainous area, Splash Garden is a beach, Soft Museum is a museum, etc. The weirdness here is not in their themes, but how they are presented, which to me makes way more sense than throwing a bunch of random things on screen and causing sensory overload. These are places that the main characters could have seen or visited in the real world, but have been warped and twisted as a result of their own subconscious. Compare that to something like Amazing Arena from Knuckles Chaotix, which I don't know, it's just a bunch of shapes and colors to me. I couldn't tell you at all what the actual theming is. Now, going with the theme of the game's visuals, the actual graphics of the game and its cutscenes are actually severely outdated. Now, to give you some context as to how 3D animation was like at the time of this game's release, the first Toy Story was released in 1995, only a year prior to this game. Now, go back and take a look at that movie. Its visuals are probably way worse than you remembered, right? Well, if that was the pinnacle of high-quality 3D animation at the time, just imagine the quality of 3D animated cutscenes in a Sega Saturn game. The cutscenes in Nights into Dreams look like that germ awareness video that they show you in school.
Hello, would you like some donuts?
My favorite, glazed donut. Oh, my candy donuts. Oh, no, chocolate. Oh, but I'm on a diet. Oh, well, I'll just have an itty-bitty.
Why did she put her hand on all the donuts? Why did he let her put her hand on all the donuts? They are absolutely horrendous by today's standards, and the in-game graphics don't fare much better. Even the Steam version, which cleans up some of the graphics of the game, still looks pretty outdated. In any other game situation, the quality of these visuals would age the game like cheese, and the more and more we moved away from its original release date, the worse it would get. However, I don't believe this to be the case with Nights into Dreams. In fact, the exact opposite is true. The more the animation in this game ages, the more uncanny the visuals in the game become, and that means the more it plays into both surrealism and nostalgia. Let's start with nostalgia. Yes, it's true that the game's visuals look awful by today's standards, but remember that at some point in time, this was all people had to go off of. We didn't have the experience or technology to produce Final Fantasy VII Remake levels of graphical fidelity. The FF7 remake of that day was the original Final Fantasy VII, and that looked like Roblox. As a lot of us experienced the evolution of animation in gaming, we still cherished those memories we had with those old, weird-looking games who, at one point, were considered to be up to the standard that most people expected. Mario 64, for example, may look all polygonal and outdated compared to Mario Odyssey, but I still have a lot of good memories with Mario 64, and I love the game for both what it was back then and what it is today. It's that nostalgic feeling of remembering the good times we had with our childhood games that allows Knights to connect to the player and almost invade their dreamscape, especially the older and more nostalgic the player becomes. By admittedly unintentionally replicating the look of older game titles, Knights unlocks these subconscious memories and emotions that have been locked away in each player's psyche, which have ultimately shaped the way they dream and even think. But what if you didn't grow up with the games of old? Many people who play games now started off with the HD generation, and never got to experience the horrors of the polygonal world of the 90s and early 2000s. So how would Knights tap into the dreamscape of these players? How could this game age well without nostalgia? Well, just for these people, Nights into Dreams replaces that age-old feeling of bliss with the feeling of not exactly knowing what it is you're looking at. By this I mean, the more bizarre the visuals of the game seem to the player, the more effective it is at convincing you you're in a dream. Yes, the game looks all old, and the limitations of the game are so obvious, and the character models look terrifying sometimes, and the animation in the cutscenes is so weird and slow, and it makes you question whether you're even in reality or not. But is that not a dream? Is a dream not a warped, strange amalgamation of things in your mind? Is a dream not nonsensical, bringing the dreamer to a state of either zen or panic, not comprehensible to anyone but the said dreamer themselves? Remember, we the player are peering into the dreams of people who aren't us. So while the dreams themselves may not mean much to us personally, we can still understand the core concept of a dream and how they affect the dreamer. We understand just by Knights' visuals the dreamlike quality of the things that the kids in the game are going through, and that is something that anyone, not just people with a connection to this game or games that look similar to it, can relate to. Basically, what I'm trying to say is that regardless of what connection you may have to the aged visuals of the game, they play an important role in immersing you into the dream world that is the setting of Nights into Dreams, and the aging process just makes that much more effective. Of course, a dream, like a game, isn't all visuals, is it? There's some action involved there, too. You, the dreamer/player, have to take part in your dream/game and decide the outcome. Whether you win or lose, whether you live or die, that's all up to you. The dream or game can influence your decision, of course, but in the end, what happens is because of you. So, how does the gameplay of Nights into Dreams influence you, per se? Well, the feeling of flying around freely is pretty dreamlike, right? Can't do that in real life. Plus, delving even deeper into that idea, flying requires the unison of both the respective child protagonist and knights, something that plays into the idea of Jungian psychology. In this case, this unison would be representative of the children embracing their shadow, which is knights, to accomplish feats that are otherwise not possible. Jungian psychology is actually used quite a bit throughout this game, and it's yet another aspect of the Knight series that makes the whole experience feel more dreamlike. I'll talk about that a little bit later though, because besides flying, nothing gameplay-wise that I can think of is really influenced by Jungian psychology. It's more so about the visuals and what different characters represent. Now, I suppose what I really meant by gameplay influencing you or guiding you is the actual structure of the game. Nights into Dreams begins with a cutscene for each child explaining their real-life situations and what led them to be feeling so down. Elliot is being bullied at the basketball court, and Clarice is just insecure about her singing abilities. Simple and to the point. After that, you're just thrown into the game. No dialogue, no audio explanation of what you have to do, and only a small animation there to steer you where you want to go without outright telling you. There is a bit of text here and there, score calculation and a timer, but besides that, nothing else. Nothing to outright guide you in the right direction. All that other stuff is just something that you need as a player to actually play the game. And when it comes to bosses, right after each dream, you're just transported to this pocket dimension where only you and the boss exist. It's completely separate from the rest of the level, and again, has no explanation whatsoever. The transitions from level to level are more obvious as you're taken back to the Dream Select menu every time you finish an area and its respective boss. Even so, you're not given that much of a description in that level select menu. This continuous structure reminds me of two of their design outlines. One of them kind of plays into that nostalgia factor again, and that's the structure of classic games, specifically those of the 8-bit and 16-bit era. And the other one is just, again, surrealism, dreams in general, how everyone experiences dreams. Now going back to that nostalgia factor, in games like Super Mario Bros., Sonic 1, Pac-Man, all those arcade games, you would start by simply being thrown into the game and learning as you play. There weren't really any cutscenes between levels. Mario gets kind of close to this with the "Your princess is in another castle" text, and the later Sonic games do have a few cutscenes in between, but that's about the extent of it. So you just have to go from level to boss, if that applies, and repeat until you finish the game. It wasn't until later generations of consoles that we really started to see fleshed out stories and cutscenes in non-dialogue heavy games like platformers. Stuff like Psychonauts, and even the later Mario games, which still don't have that much of a story, do have a lot more dialogue than earlier entries in the Mario series. Again, it's not a perfect comparison because it does have a menu you're taken back to constantly, but each individual level still works at hacking into the mindset of the player and reminding them of something they're familiar with. And now going back to my second point, this reminds me of the structure of a dream in general. Since when do dreams have a set of guidelines that you're given from the beginning? In my experience, a dream just places you right into the middle of the action and gives you no explanation whatsoever. If you're not lucid dreaming, then you don't even notice you're being placed in the middle of a random situation. You just go with it because it makes sense. Furthermore, when you go from one situation to another in a dream, the transitions are either so smooth or sporadic that you don't even have enough time to process that previous situation or how you got from here to there. You instead just focus on what's right in front of you and keep going. That's exactly what these levels do. Each level and boss acts as a separate situation within a dream that you're not supposed to take the time to analyze. What's more, you're on a timer while you play as knights, so you never really have the time to take apart anything anyway, and that kind of goes back to the nostalgia factor, because a lot of old games used to have timers. That's kind of outdated now, but that's something that used to exist. The timer becomes an even more apparent factor in the bosses, where you're given no explanation of what to do and you have to think on your feet. It makes the situation more hectic and of course more nightmarish because you are in a nightmare at that point in time. And once you wake up and have that respite, that time to process everything that just happened, you only have a few moments to remember what just occurred before you forget the entire dream. As the players, we're lucky we can play the game over and over again as many times as we'd like, but from the protagonist's perspectives, they can really only play this game once. It might help to think of this as akin to playing an obscure game once as a kid and not seeing anything about it since. It's basically just a dream at that point, right? You never really took the time to analyze it while you were playing it, you just played it. And now that you try to think back on it, it's kinda hard to remember. You remember some things, but other things are just not quite clear. Essentially what I'm trying to say is that Nights is built in such a way that replicates the forward-moving nature of dreams, and maybe even that of concepts stuck in each player's head. The gameplay and structure of Nights purposely push you onward throughout each dream, but these aren't the only parts of the game to do so. Now finally, this is what I really wanted to talk about. The music of Nights is what really pushed me to talk about this game, so I wanted this to be the final major section. There are a couple of things that Nights' OST does right, besides being incredible. If you haven't given this soundtrack a listen, I highly recommend it. Better yet, listen to each track in-game. The music sounds twice as good while you're getting the full experience. And the whole reason behind that full experience sounding and feeling so great is just how tailor-made the OST is for this game. It's as if, just like how the developers of the game researched in-depth dream psychology to utilize in the game's visuals, the composers did the exact same thing with the music and audio design. The audio and musical tracks of Nights into Dreams invoke the idea of being in a dream, or being just as surreal as the visuals through their structures, melodies, and instrumentation choices. The framework of quite a few boss tracks in the game have some very unique quirks to them. I want to take a look at one track in particular that stood out to me the first time I heard it in full. A piece entitled She Had Long Ears. It's the theme for Puffy, the very first boss in Elliot's series of dreams, and it starts as this imposing, operatic theme that would be pretty standard for most bosses. Give it a listen. It then immediately changes after the first 10 seconds or so. It then becomes this. It's more playful, incorporating this accordion-like instrument. I'm not musically inclined, so I don't know for sure. The song now fits Puffy's design rather than her status as a boss, without completely taking away the menacing aspect of the song. And in fact, in some ways, this portion of the track could be seen as more dreadful than the previous part. Now, from what you've heard so far, this is pretty standard stuff. An introduction leading to the rest of the song. It's good, but nothing special, at least not yet. Midway into the track, this happens. Goes into this crazy, jazzy bar fight theme, I guess, out of nowhere with a bit of electric guitar in the background. It sounds so messy, so out of place, so out of nowhere, and pretty good actually, at least in my opinion. It's a departure from what you would normally think for just any old boss theme, but also this scenario in particular. Like I said before, the operatic yet playful nature of the original fits the character of Puffy just fine, and even this specific area is pretty fitting for that song. And to top it all off, the final few seconds end like this. A hip-hop version of the second part of the song. Odd, right? It makes you wonder why the composers would make something so nonsensical. And then you realize it's not supposed to make sense, because a dream doesn't have to make sense. That's right, we're looping back to that concept again. You initially think that you know where the song is going, but then it goes into this wacky, surrealist state that throws you off completely, and you're just supposed to accept it. You can point out how weird it is, but as you play the game, your brain is more focused on the boss that you have to keep bouncing around than the music you're hearing. It all subconsciously reinforces the idea that you're in a dream. Not only this, but the fact that, especially compared to the game's level themes and other tracks, the transitions between sections are so sudden and jarring that it contributes to the idea that the bosses are in fact nightmares. They are supposed to catch you off guard, disorient you even, to instill fear in you, just as the gameplay does. She Had Long Ears is probably the boss theme that takes this idea to the most extreme, but you still have stuff like The Mantle, which starts like this. And goes to this. And ends like this. It goes from this reserved funk-oriented track in the first third to a creepy ambiance with this robotic voice in the background to a smooth saxophone dominating the entire track in the final third. There are a couple of boss tracks that don't follow this pattern and instead have a very organized and repetitious melody, which could be considered freaky in its own right. But even so, most themes still manage to utilize this technique of either subtly or sporadically including odd musical pieces within each track in the game, or at least each boss track. Reala's theme even toys with the game's main leitmotif. And this is also just the boss stuff too. I haven't even talked about some of the other tracks in the game. I believe that just as the disorienting feeling of the game's boss themes are important to creating that nightmarish, weird feeling, the melodic choices of most of the other tracks in the game are important to giving the game that rose-tinted feeling. Unlike the boss themes, the actual level themes of the game are pretty calm and relaxing, even when they're upbeat. Instead of trying to make you feel uneasy, each level theme reflects the idea that NiGHTopia itself is supposed to be a personal paradise for each dreamer. Suburban Museum, for example, the track for Soft Museum, starts off with this high-pitched, bagpipey sounding instrument. And then for the rest of the song consists of this upbeat, jumpy melody, which is very fun to listen to while playing. It's this beautiful, nostalgic sounding piece that almost reminds me of a sunset. And that's just one of the tracks in the game. Each of the game's level themes are whimsical and fun in their own respective ways without sounding overly harsh. And the thing that I really think ties everything together, the boss themes, the level themes, everything in between, is the actual sound of every piece of audio in Nights. Because this is a Sega Saturn game, the sound quality of each sound effect and even the music isn't completely up to par with what we'd hear today. The remaster fixes this quite a bit, but you can still tell from the game's audio alone that Nights is pretty old. This further extends to each musical track's instrumentation choice, as the music had to accommodate for the Sega Saturn's sound chip. However, just like the game's aged visuals help the game get its point across, the poor audio just solidifies how foreign some of the game's dreamlike aspects are. Peaceful Moment, for example, is the boss victory theme, and it was one of the tracks that was actually updated in Nights' sequel, Journey of Dreams. While I actually prefer the Journey of Dreams version, there's something about the synthy, lower quality of the original piece that the updated version just doesn't nail. Give the two a listen. This synthiness extends to most of the sound effects in the game too, giving the menus this otherworldly feeling. I want to focus on two more tracks in the game, the first being Gate of Your Dreams. Gate of Your Dreams is the main menu theme, and one of the first things that you listen to as you begin the game. From the very start, it feels incredibly dreamlike. It uses those synths, or maybe MIDI instruments as well, but also incorporates a couple sound clips from Home Alone, actually. The sample clips blend in quite a bit with the actual music, to the point where the voices are only recognizable when you actually start paying attention. Furthermore, while the track consists of a single repeated lullaby-like melody, the samples do not repeat as quickly as the music does. This sort of creates a friction between the melody and the samples, as if to remind you that in a dream, you can't really tell what's going on due to a lack of focus on that dream. Again, looping back to that idea that, dreams aren't supposed to be focused on. A lot of loops in this game. And of course, the voice clips just make it sound weird and surreal, but still comforting. And of course, I couldn't go on making this video without talking about this last track, Dreams Dreams. It's the end credits theme for Nights into Dreams, and also the source of the game's main leitmotif. That motif, by the way, is amazing. I don't know how, but that melody matches the theming of this game so well that I honestly can't believe that the composers came up with it. Maybe I'm giving it too much credit, but the way that melody dips from major to minor scale, I don't know, maybe it's just high to low, but that reversal is so incredibly fitting for the contrast that is a high-flying adventure that takes place while you sleep. It starts as this soft, somber piece before completely dropping that for a Hallmark Christmas movie theme. It's a very cheesy song, but it's the right kind of cheesy. It's quite a departure from the rest of the game's OST though. While everything else tries to sound upbeat, or imposing, or jazzy, or just plain weird, this song is pretty straightforward. It doesn't try to be surreal or mystical in any way, it's just a nice song. This begs the question, if it's so normal, what makes it so dreamlike? Well, I think that there could be many ways to interpret this song and answer this question, but the way I see it is this. It's the lyrics. At first glance, you would think that the lyrics are for some random love song, and to be fair, it could be. I don't know if the writers purposely tried to imply any romantic love, but, it's possible. Thing is, I think the lyrics were purposely left this vague. It's supposed to be reflective of the journey that each child went through and how, even though their memories of it are pretty vague due to it all being a dream, they found a way to face their problems and even a way to make a new friend. I think it nicely ties all the themes of the game together and adds just that much more human emotion into the game. Okay, I know I said only 2 more songs, but real quick, Sowing Seeds. This song reminds me of Coraline's soundtrack with those individual voices being plucked one after another, and if you remember what that movie is about and how weird it gets, I'd say it's pretty fitting, even though this game came way earlier. This song is played during Claris's initial dream sequence, and it gets interrupted for something way more terrifying as the dream becomes a nightmare, so it becomes so satisfying at the end when you hear the full song being sung by Claris herself. And of course, it returns to the motif from Dreams Dreams. So that's basically it. Nights was a great game, a great experience. I want more of these games. Hopefully stuff that kind of keeps the spirit of this game. Journey of Dreams did some things right, did some things kind of wrong with that. But I think you can still bring back this IP. I think there's a lot of potential with this. One more thing. I also just wanted to say that in the movie Mrs. Doubtfire, Robin Williams hums this song that's very similar to the leitmotif of this game. It's probably a coincidence because that movie came out like 3 years before this game, but I just thought I should point it out.